our mission here at CNN and journalists. The news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about our lead plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher in New York, and this is One World. Legal challenges have set the UK's controversial new migrant programme off to a turbulent start. An airplane was on the tarmac Tuesday evening, ready to fly asylum seekers in the UK to Rwanda. It's an arrangement the British government says is aimed at stopping people smuggling and saving lives. But the European Court of Human Rights intervened, issuing a series of rulings in several cases that effectively meant grounding that particular flight. Advocacy groups say that the plan is cruel. They say it's inhumane. And UK officials say there's been an uptick in the number of migrants crossing the Channel from France to England since the plan was actually announced in April. But as you're about to hear, proponents of this policy are not backing down.
We believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun. This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals.
CNN reporter Nada Bashir joins us live now from Paris. So Nada, that flight yesterday that was set to take off, grounded because of an intervention by the European Court of Human Rights. What happens next?
Look, we heard there from Home Secretary Priti Patel. She's previously said that she was disappointed and surprised to see that the European Court of Human Rights had intervened. We now know they intervened on behalf of 3 asylum seekers set to be on that flight out of 7. But that number, of course, going down from more than 100. That was the original figure that we believed to be having received notices that they would be sent to Rwanda during that High Court challenge we heard on Friday. And the Home Secretary did give some details as to what we can expect next. She said that those who weren't on the flight, who had been removed, would be tagged, that we would be waiting to see those legal challenges put forward on an individual basis, giving them time to put forward a challenge to that deportation notice. And that is exactly what individuals and advocacy groups have been calling for, more time for the legality of this entire process to be really thought through and assessed. But of course, there are some questions over the policy as a whole. Now, the fact that the European Court of Human Rights has intervened could set an important precedent. And we actually heard from Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He was asked about this yesterday, whether or not it was time for the British government to withdraw the UK from the European Convention of Human Rights to allow the government to make its own rules, its own decisions on these sorts of policies. The Prime Minister didn't address this directly, but he also didn't avoid saying that the UK would withdraw. Take a listen.
Will it be necessary to change some laws to help us as we go along? It may very well be, and all these options are under constant review.
Now, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary Priti Patel have repeatedly stressed that they are pushing ahead with this policy, that even if that flight didn't leave last night, there will be subsequent flights, and they do expect to have those asylum seekers who were withdrawn from that flight on the next few flights. But this has, of course, raised serious concerns. You heard there from the Home Secretary criticising the opposition that the government has faced. But I have to note that it's not just coming from the opposition Labour Party or other parliamentarians. We've heard from the UN's own refugee agency describing the policy as unlawful, warning that they believe that the policy and the procedure in Rwanda lacks adequate safeguards for asylum seekers and refugees. Human Rights Watch pointing to what they've described as an appalling human rights record. So there are some serious concerns. And, you know, the government has stressed from the beginning that this whole policy has been designed as a deterrent to prevent people from making that dangerous crossing from France over the Channel into the UK. But we actually visited some of those refugee camps in northern France. We spoke to those refugees waiting to make that crossing, and many said that they remain undeterred, that they've already been through so much, through so many long, difficult journeys, and have come from often dangerous places, that this is simply another obstacle that they'll have to face in that attempt to reach safety. And in fact, on Tuesday, when that flight was supposed to take off, we saw 444 people arriving in the UK through that channel crossing, according to the Ministry of Defence. So we are expecting to see those figures go up as we head into the summer months. And clearly, this policy hasn't stopped people from trying to reach the UK. Zain?
Yeah, based on those numbers, it hasn't made any difference whatsoever. Nada Bashir, live for us. Thank you so much. Right now, Western allies are discussing urgent military support for Ukraine at a meeting in Brussels. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the alliance would continue to provide advanced weapons and logistical support to the country. But there are fears some of that aid is not reaching the battlefield. Russia on Tuesday claimed to have destroyed a Ukrainian warehouse full of NATO weapons, including howitzers that Ukraine desperately needs to defend the east. As fighting rages on, Western intelligence officials say the war is entering a pivotal moment and that one of three scenarios could unfold. Russia could either continue to make gains in the east, the war could harden into a stalemate, or Russia could redefine its goals and engineer an end to the war. But right now, Moscow is not easing pressure on Ukraine. In fact, former President Medvedev suggested the country may not even exist in 2 years. He suggested Ukraine may not even exist in 2 years. Let's get more now from our correspondents on the ground. We've got CNN's Selma Abdelaziz, who's joining us from Kyiv. We've got Oren Liebman joining us live from Brussels. So let me start with you. This is the moment of truth for Ukraine. It's not just a pivotal moment. I mean, this is really a crucial time in the battlefield, and Ukrainians are suffering huge, sort of severe losses right now. What is at stake for this country?
Well, you're really looking at determining the future outcome of this conflict. Ukrainian forces are facing an, of course, much more powerful Russian military, one that has 10 times the artillery of Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian troops are dying by the hundreds, more than 100 a day, according to Ukrainian officials. They are struggling to hold back a Russian advance in Severodonetsk. That city seems all but certain to fall in days. Already 80% of it is under Russian control. Ukrainian forces have had to pull back into fortified positions. There's thousands of civilians still trapped inside. Officials are trying to evacuate them, but the three main bridges that lead out of Severodonetsk, those have been severely damaged. What we're looking at right now is all along that eastern front, that eastern flank. If you listen to President Zelensky, he promises over and over again that the territories that were lost, such as Mariupol and Berdyansk, that those will somehow come back to Ukraine. That looks almost to be a pipe dream at this point. What is the fear when we talk about this pivotal moment, this outcome that could change, is that that eastern flank becomes permanently Russian occupied, that they annex these territories eventually, much like they did in Crimea, and that President Putin's appetite for taking more Ukrainian land doesn't end there, that he then uses that eastern territory, those newly gained lands, he solidifies that land and he uses it to launch more operations in the future to try to gain more Ukrainian land. So what you're looking at is potentially a long war of attrition, one that could see this force, this Ukrainian army, really fall and crumble in the face of this Russian might, the sheer mass of Russian forces. They are entirely dependent, and this comes from Ukrainian officials, entirely dependent on Western support. And we have to note here that Western support is waning. There is high gas prices. You are looking at economic outcomes. How much longer can they sustain this fight for Ukraine?
Selma, stand by. Oren, let me bring you in. President Zelensky said that the losses that Ukrainians are experiencing on the ground are painful, but that we, being the Ukrainians, have to hold on. Is weaponry at this point really the main, if not the only, deciding factor in determining the outcome of this war?
Weaponry is a key factor, certainly, and we expect in a short time that the White House will announce another $1 billion in aid to Ukraine, according to a U.S. official. That will include some of that weaponry, artillery, ammunition, the howitzers they're looking for, as well as coastal defense weapons. But that's not all that makes a fight. The morale, the will to fight, all of that is critical in deciding the outcome of a battle. Ukraine has repeatedly shown that it has the morale to fight. It has the will to stay in this fight, even as it faces outgunned and outmanned numbers. Russia still has some issues in its battle. The supply lines, the supply issues that we've seen since the beginning, those still exist. They're just far shorter lines right next to Russia, as they're fighting essentially alongside the border of Russia inside Ukraine. So they're able to sort of solve some of those issues. But there are other issues here that Russia is facing, which means the fight itself, according to a senior defense official, isn't simply determined now at this point. Even though, as you pointed out, it is a critical moment. One of the other reasons it's critical is that Ukraine is running out of the Soviet-era ammo and weaponry that they've used. The U.S. and the West knew this was coming, so they transitioned them and have been in the process of shifting them to more modern weaponry. Similar in many ways, but it still requires training. The challenge is that training has to happen in the middle of the conflict. The U.S. is aware of this, how critical this moment is. Defense Lloyd Austin saying the U.S. and allies and partners are still there to provide weaponry. Here he is from just a short time ago.
Several of our allies and partners are providing howitzers and artillery ammunition, and Ukrainian forces are now using that to defend the Donbass. And meanwhile, other forms of military assistance, from tanks to helicopters, continue to flow into Ukraine. So we've got a lot done thus far, but we don't have any time to waste. So we're here to dig in our spurs.
In the billion-dollar package that we expect to be announced in a short time from the White House, there's two parts to that. First, there is what's known as a presidential drawdown, so that'll be pulling from Defense Department stocks and sending that into Ukraine. And then there's also a part of that that'll be from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and that's when the U.S. contracts directly with arms manufacturers to send weapons to Ukraine. That takes a little longer. Those contracts have to essentially work their way through the system, and the products, the weapons, have to be produced. But that means Ukraine has more weapons that are on their way soon. As Ukraine says, they have these challenges. They're facing the difficulty of the battle in eastern Ukraine, in Severodonetsk, so they're looking for those weapons. Can they get there quickly enough? That, of course, is the key question as we look to see how this battle unfolds and rages over the course of the immediate future here.
As you point out, weaponry is a principal factor, but of course not the only factor in deciding the outcome of this war. Oren Lieberman live for us, Selma Aziz, thank you both so much. As mentioned, we are expecting the U.S. Defense Secretary, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, to give remarks and answer questions later on this hour. In about half an hour or so from now in Brussels, we will bring you that event as and when it happens live. A small group of Ukrainian fighters has been training to use advanced weapons from the U.S., but those troops have not entered the fight yet. And even when they do, they're worried they won't have enough firepower to fend off Russia. CNN's Ben Wiedemann reports.
American symbol, American weapon. Ukrainian troops try out new equipment, U.S.-supplied M4 rifles fresh out of the box. Away from the front lines, these soldiers are preparing to join the battle raging in the east.
This exercise is designed to accustom Ukrainian forces to the use of Western weapons. This is an American 50 caliber machine gun firing Italian bullets. There's a problem, though. We're told there's not enough Western ammunition.
And not enough weapons either. Even in this drill, much of the firepower dates back to the Soviet era. Ukrainian forces are slowly losing ground in the battle for the eastern Donbass region. Morale here is high. island. We need a basic minimum to avoid more casualties. Artillery, smart weapons, radar, drones, and people to train us, says the commander, Lieutenant Alexander, a veteran of the French Foreign Legion. We've shown we will fight. We will learn to use these weapons. And that will take time. And time is a luxury this nation at war cannot afford. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Central Ukraine.
U.S. President Joe Biden is urging U.S. oil refineries to ramp up fuel supply. He calls the big profits they've been seeing unacceptable as gas prices surge. In a few hours, the U.S. Central Bank is expected to make its biggest interest rate hike in nearly 3 decades to try to tamp down stubborn inflation. Investors are closely eyeing the Fed decision. And the Dow started off today in positive territory. U.S. stocks had dipped more than 20% from January's peak. Officially a bear market. CNN business correspondent Rahel Solomon joins us live now. So Rahel, just walk us through this. We are expecting about 75 sort of basis point increase at this point in time. How do we anticipate that markets are going to react to that?
Well, it seems like it's priced in at this point. Essentially, investors in the investment community tend to believe widely that it's expected. And so we saw markets actually the last few days actually accelerate a bit, certainly when you compare it to last Friday when we got that really hot inflation report. So I think, you know, I've heard some commentary that at this point, the only thing the Federal Reserve could do to surprise markets or shock markets is to raise rates by 50 basis points. Anything is on the table for sure. But again, you're seeing the markets in the green, which is something that we haven't seen the last, last week after that hot inflation report. So I think by and large, the expectation and the hope among the investment community is that the Fed comes out strong today with a message of 0.75%, which is 3 times what is traditional in a more traditional environment. But the expectation and the hope is that the Fed really gets in front of this. And there is a concern and a feeling among some, certainly critics, that they've been too slow. They were wrong on inflation being transitory. Hindsight, of course, is 2020, but they were wrong on that, and they were too slow to raise rates. So at this point, I think the investment community wants to see them really come out strongly.
Yeah, so how do they, though, sort of juggle? I mean, it's really the sort of perennial question. How do they juggle raising rates, especially by such a large number here, without doing damage in the meantime to the economy? And what is the general anticipation at this point for a possible recession here in the U.S.?
Well, I think it increased. The odds of a recession increased after Friday's inflation report, rather. And actually, we could talk about the jobs report because that's an important part of this as well. But essentially, the job for the Federal Reserve was already a difficult one, right? They're trying to slow demand. They're trying to cool demand, but they don't want to do so aggressively that it really pumps the brakes on the economy in terms of consumer spending. So, this is why we call interest rate hikes a blunt tool. It's not, they can't do this with precision because they're making these decisions, and then we see them sort of take place in the economy about 6 to 9 months after the rate hike. So it's a bit of an art and a science, Zane, but this is what's really challenging for the Fed, right? How do you raise rates and accurately predict how the economy is going to respond to it? We are already seeing some tech companies start to lay off workers. We're also getting reports of a cooling in the housing market. So it's an art and a science, but becoming increasingly difficult for the Fed.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in about an hour and a half from now. You are going to be a very, very busy girl for the rest of the day. Get some sleep. Try to get some sleep today, Rahel. I'll see you tomorrow.
I'm on it.
Okay. All right, still to come here. Washed away, a home that stood for decades now floating in a rain-swollen river. And the flood danger is not over yet in the western United States. We'll have details ahead.
Jesus.
Blueprint, in association with Qatar Airways.
The contents of this bottle may be helping airlines reduce their carbon footprint. It's called SAF, or Sustainable Aviation Fuel, a type of biofuel primarily from waste and residues like used cooking oil. Neste, a Finnish oil refinery, has been manufacturing SAF for more than 10 years. Neste says they clean the oil by placing it in a biorefinery to remove impurities. As of now, most planes are not yet ready to operate fully on biofuel.
It has to be blended with fossil product when it's going into the aircraft. But SAF one day will be completely replacing fossil.
SAF has helped power more than 370,000 commercial flights since 2016, a significant step towards the industry's goal of net zero emissions by 2050.
Blueprint, in association with Qatar Airways.
After almost 2 years of fighting, Ethiopia's government formed a committee to negotiate peace with forces from the Tigray region. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the committee will have 10 to 15 days to outline details of the negotiations, and that the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front would also present its preconditions before they move forward. This marks a significant step toward peace in Tigray. The region has been utterly, and I mean utterly, devastated by the brutal conflict. Thousands of people have been killed and many more have been displaced. France says a top member of an ISIS affiliate has been captured in West Africa. French-led forces seized him during a mission near the Mali-Niger border. He's suspected of organizing attacks against military bases in Mali. His capture comes as France is readying its exit from Mali. It's been there almost a decade battling jihadist insurgents, but relations between France and Mali's ruling military junta have soured. Entire houses and buildings gone in an instant. That's what dangerous flooding is doing in parts of the western United States. This building, my God, this building toppled into the rain-swollen Yellowstone River in Montana. Nearby, one of the most famous national parks in the U.S. is now off limits to visitors, and much of it could remain closed for months. CNN's Nick Watt is in Livingston, Montana for us.
Zain, this is the oldest national park in the world, and right now it is closed to the public, really, because of climate change. What happened here is the Yellowstone River has risen to all-time record highs, caused by a late dump of heavy snow, early high temperatures in the summer that melted some of it, throw in a lot of rain, and this river saw about 3 months worth of water come down in just the space of 3 days. So this huge park, more than 2 million acres, birds, bears, big sky, closed to the public. Now, this northern part of the park could be closed for months to come. Why? Because the only road in ran parallel to this river, and it has been washed away in multiple places and could take months to repair. Now, there are still some groups, backcountry hiking, camping groups in the park. They've been in touch with officials, and apparently they are not in any danger right now. We have seen thousands of people coming out of the park, many to Gardner, this town on the northern entrance to the park. For a couple of days, they were having to be helicoptered further north to safety because the road from Gardner was washed out. It's still closed, but it is passable for essential travel only. So this town is no longer cut off. But the issue is going to be there could be more water to come. There is still about 12 inches of snowpack up there, and high temperatures are forecast for the weekend. So there could be more damage to come. Now, where I'm standing right here, this used to be a home for national park workers, and it was washed away. So what we're seeing here is the oldest national park on Earth closed to the public because of extreme weather and the damage that it can bring. Zane?
For those of us in the US and Europe, the weather forecast is probably the same. Hot, very, very, very hot. The heat is being pumped around an area of high pressure that's just sitting over Europe. It's called a heat dome. And right now, France and Spain are bearing the brunt of it.
This is not normal, but we have to accept the things that come. The heat is the heat.
In Mexico City, there is heat, but the air keeps you fresh. Here, the air burns you.
We have to do things indoors because I don't think we can cope walking under the sun.
In the US, dangerously hot and humid conditions persist from the upper Midwest to the southeast, taxing power grids, raising fire warnings, and forcing Americans to find any way to beat the heat. Let's bring in meteorologist Chad Myers. So Chad, these sorts of 100-degree sort of temperatures do happen, you know, in certain parts of this country, but they're becoming, it seems, a little bit more frequent. Are we going to have to get used to these sorts of temperatures?
Well, I think so, because, I mean, climate change is warming the entire Earth, warming the entire globe, and if you get a heat wave that would have been 35, now that heat wave is 37, and then your heat index makes it feel more like 39. So yes, this is kind of the thing with this one, Zane, both of them, the one in Europe and the one here in America, is that it's very early in the season. The sun isn't even at its highest sun angle yet. We have 100,000 or so people without power here in parts of the East because of severe weather that knocked down trees and power lines just a couple of days ago. 50 cities across the eastern part of the country will break records today. Now, those aren't the same records that you have in July and August. These are June records, but they're still going to be in the 40s in many spots, especially down to the south. Savannah's going to feel like 43. That's hot. You talked about the heat dome. The heat dome is moving to the west now. Kind of almost the wrong way, but it is moving that direction, and then the heat is going to be on in the southwestern United States. So Iberian Peninsula, France, you are in for another scorcher, maybe 3 or 4 in a row. Easily, temperatures on the thermometer in the shade will approach 40. 40 degrees in the shade. You step in the sun, it's going to feel 5 or 10 degrees warmer than that. So your temperatures in parts of Spain, very hot. It doesn't get away for any time soon. We see the cool air across parts of Eastern Europe, but this hot air right through here across all of Southern and Western Europe, that's going to hang around for a few more days. Portugal and along the oceans and the bays and the estuaries may be a little bit cooler, but there's a lot of red. That means above normal temps there, Zane.
Gosh, as you mentioned, yeah, we're going to have to get used to this. Chad Myers live for us. Thank you so much, my friend.
You're welcome.
All right, coming up, some countries with deep pockets are accused of buying a better reputation with sport. Do such plans work? We'll take a look at sports washing next.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
OPay is Nigeria's foremost financial inclusion service provider. Everywhere in Nigeria today, even in the remotest part of Nigeria, we have a large agency banking business with more than 500,000 agents across Nigeria. But we're also the last mile in terms of access to financial services for more than 10 million Nigerians, many of which do not have any form of bank account through the OPay digital wallet. We go to where banks cannot go to. We are much more nimble. We are more tech-oriented. Therefore, we can deploy in a more agile way and get to reach far many more areas. That is where you find OPay. The excluded in Nigeria will be truly brought into the formal financial services, and that's our mission.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN Partner Hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels, connected to your world.
We released last year the very first motorcycle with radar. And what that's allowed us to do is to be able to put some technology in the motorcycle that gives features of safety for the rider, including blind spot indicators that's been used on cars for years. So we're not only dedicated to that performance, but also to try and improve our environmental impact and also the safety for the riders themselves.
I'm Paula Hancock in Seoul. This is CNN.
Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines. Iran has confirmed it's preparing to test launch 2 satellite-carrying rockets. Many countries see Tehran's launch as a provocative step since the technology used is similar to what is needed for intercontinental ballistic missiles. It comes as tensions remain high over Iran's nuclear program. Russian state media reports that Brittany Griner will remain in custody for at least 17 more days. The U.S. basketball star has been held in Russia since February on accusations of drug smuggling. The U.S. says she's been wrongfully detained. Some of her supporters call her a political pawn amid Ukraine war tensions. And fans of K-pop supergroup BTS can breathe easier. The group is not breaking up, just taking a break. The members say they want to explore solo projects. One member says a change is what they need right now and that it's important for BTS to start their second chapter. Despite intense pushback from advocacy groups, protesters, religious leaders and others, the British government is standing firm on its plans to start deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda. Perhaps buoyed by the public outcry against the plan, some of those migrants are not leaving the UK without a legal fight. In fact, multiple challenges have actually stymied the government's plan to fly those asylum seekers out of the country. Staunch proponents like Home Secretary Priti Patel say it's about fighting crime, ending human smuggling and deterring people from making the treacherous journey across the Channel from France to England. But according to the government's own data, since the UK made the announcement in April, the number of migrants crossing the Channel has actually gone up. Time now for the exchange and my next guest, who says the UK's migrant policy is nothing more than a cruel vanity project and possibly unlawful. Colin Yeo is author of Welcome to Britain, Fixing Our Broken Immigration System. He joins us live now. Colin, thank you so much for being with us. So this ruling by the European Court of Human Rights, it's important to note, is a temporary one. It's an interim one. What happens next? What happens in 4 weeks in July?
So in 4 weeks' time, a British court is going to make a decision on some really difficult, meaty issues around whether this Rwanda scheme complies with international law, complies with the Refugee Convention, complies with domestic law as well. Probably the case is going to last a few days. Probably even once it's decided, that won't necessarily be the end of things because there may well be onward appeals. And as you say, Zain, the decision from the European Court of Human Rights was just a sort of interim one. It was just about where those who are being affected by this should live while they're waiting for the outcome. Should they have to be removed to Rwanda and stay there and then be brought back to the UK if they later succeed, or should they stay in the UK pending a final outcome? UK judges had ruled they should be removed to Rwanda, which quite a lot of us were quite surprised by, quite frankly. And then eventually European judge ruled that actually they should stay in the UK.
And sort of some of these legal challenges have focused on one Iraqi man that was set to be aboard this flight. Do we know, based on some of the legal challenges, and I guess I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball here, but based on what might happen in July, do we know which sort of asylum seekers will be allowed to remain in the UK versus which kind of asylum seekers will actually end up being sent potentially to Kigali?
It's a really interesting question, because the the scope of the deal between the UK and Rwanda is really broad. So there's this, they're calling it a memorandum of understanding. It's not a treaty as such. It's got no formal legal value. It's a kind of political agreement. And it applies potentially to all asylum seekers in the UK. So anybody who claims asylum in the UK could, under the deal, potentially be eligible to be removed to Rwanda. But you know, we're receiving about 35 to 40,000 asylum seekers per year here in the UK. Rwanda has said they'll only accept a few hundred. So somehow the UK government has to sort of limit the numbers and pick a few. There's obviously a risk of discrimination where you go about doing that sort of thing. But what the UK government has said is that they're going to focus on people who've undertaken dangerous and illegal journeys. So basically people who get into small boats to cross the channel or into the back of a lorry. And those are the people who are facing removal. But it's also, I think it's important to understand, I'm using the word asylum seeker, you're using the word asylum seeker. We're actually talking about refugees. So they haven't been formally recognised as refugees at the point at which they're bundled onto the plane to Rwanda with a one-way ticket, basically. But if they had their claims decided here in the UK, the vast majority of them would actually get that formal recognition. They are refugees, the majority of them. We get about 75% of initial decisions here in the UK are positive. So about 75% of people get a positive grant of asylum from the Home Office. And then a further half of the people who appeal go on to win their appeal. And the stats are even higher for some nationalities, like Syrians, it's 98% of them get asylum from the Home Office, but they're still facing removal to Rwanda.
I mean, it's incredible what potentially could happen. Obviously, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen until July. We'll have to wait and see. But you've argued before Parliament that this policy may indeed violate the Refugee Convention by chain refoulement. Just explain to our audience what you mean by that.
So the Refugee Convention, it prevents a state from sending somebody back either directly or indirectly to the country that they came from if there's a risk of persecution there. And the fear is that these are overwhelmingly genuine refugees. So say, for example, the Iraqi man you mentioned earlier, there were Syrians, there were Iranians, there were Afghans. They've all got a really good chance of getting asylum if their claims are decided here in the UK. They get put on a flight to Rwanda. With the greatest of respect to the Rwandans who operate the asylum system there, it's fairly rudimentary as I understand things. There's no entitlement to legal representation. They don't seem to have interpreters for some of the relevant countries. And so the fear is that they won't stand a very good chance of getting asylum in Rwanda, and then they'd be removed by Rwanda back to their home country where they might well face persecution. So that would be an example of what we call chain refoulement, where somebody gets sent back to one country and then from that country wrongly gets sent back to their original country they fled from.
Right, and that was your point in terms of how you argued before Parliament that this violates or would violate the Refugee Convention. If the government had waited, they could have sort of waited through July and ended up changing the law. Why were they in such a rush to implement this as quickly as possible?
That's a question I can't answer, I'm afraid. So a lot of it, again, I've used the phrase we were surprised by some of the developments. Again, I was quite surprised to see the government bringing forward this flight to this month, when they've made a great big fuss of passing this new piece of legislation called the Nationality and Borders Act, in order to, with you know, one of the bits of that, one of the sections of that act is all about removing people to safe third countries and under this kind of arrangement, and yet the government is only bringing it into force from late July. So why they couldn't wait until late July is a bit of a mystery. Instead, they're relying on legislation from 2004, which may work or may not work. I mean, ultimately, a judge will have to decide. But it did seem quite surprising that they were in such a rush to do this, even though they've got this legislation about to come into force that would probably make things easier for them.
Yeah, so many questions, and a lot of questions about why Rwanda was specifically chosen as the partner of choice for this as well. Colin, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sports and politics collided last weekend at the inaugural Live Golf tournament backed by Saudi Arabia. The families of 9/11 victims scolded the golfers who participated in the controversial and lucrative golf series. They say it illuminates a larger issue, using a sporting event to improve a tarnished reputation, also called sports washing. Don Riddell has more.
Sport is exciting and fun. It can make you feel good. It's big business too, and governments know that investing in sports events and even teams can make them look good. There's a word for that: sports washing. Macmillan describes it as when a corrupt or tyrannical regime uses sport to enhance its reputation. The sports event is a laundromat where countries can clean up a dirty record of human rights abuse. In the last few years, Saudi Arabia has pumped billions of dollars into sport as a way to enhance its reputation. They've invested in boxing, motorsport and horse racing. They've bought the Premier League football team Newcastle United, and now they have the highly controversial Live Golf Series. The kingdom is trying to present a softer side. They'd rather we didn't talk about their role in the war in Yemen and the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi agents. And the handsomely paid athletes seem happy to go along with it.
We're not politicians, we're professional golfers. And, you know, if Saudi Arabia wanted to use the game of golf as a way for them to get to where they want to be, and they have the resources to accelerate that experience, you know, I think we're proud to help them on that journey.
The word sports washing gained popularity in 2015 when the Sports for Rights campaign group tried to call attention to Azerbaijan's hosting of the European Games as an attempt to gloss over its controversial record on human rights. But the idea is far from original. Adolf Hitler tried it in 1936 when Nazi Germany hosted the Berlin Olympics, just 3 years before starting World War II. In more recent times, you could point to Russia's hosting of the Winter Olympics and the World Cup, while China's hosting of the Summer Games in 2008 and the 22 Winter Games were attempts to present themselves as free and fair. Both countries have controversial records in the human rights arena. Middle Eastern countries are increasingly turning to sports investment. Qatar just hosted the World Athletics Championship and will stage the FIFA World Cup in November, while Sheikh Mansour of United Arab Emirates has turned Manchester City into one of the most successful football teams in the world. As a result, some of City's fans might now be more forgiving of the UAE's restrictive approach to civil liberties. Many countries use soft power as a means of leveraging influence on the world stage, and sport is just another tool. But nobody can prove that sports washing is 100% perfect, and arguably investing in such major events could actually lead to more scrutiny than a corrupt regime would prefer. And in any case, who gets to decide who's good and who's bad? Many governments use sporting success to promote themselves internationally, and with the documented rise of nationalism around the world, is anybody really perfect anymore? Don Riddell, CNN.
All right, still to come, is Vladimir Putin the cause of rising inflation? The White House says yes, but we'll look at the other pieces of the puzzle as well.
African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities, impact communities, transform lives. Hear their stories next. In association with Glow.
I was trafficked at the age of 18. I was a single young mom trying to figure out how to put myself through school. I was lured off of a college campus in Eugene, Oregon, and I was trafficked to Las Vegas mainly for nearly 6 years. My name's Rebecca Bender, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Rebecca Bender Initiative. The way that we mentor survivors of human trafficking is through our initiative called the Elevate Academy. Elevate Academy is really a holistic school that invites survivors to join a cohort of other people just like them. They get a mentor, they get a life coach. We help take them through a number of classes, some of which are really about deeper levels of healing. When I was able to finally escape from my trafficker, I can remember during that time I had been traded and sold between 3 different traffickers. I had 2 men tattoo their names on my back like a piece of cattle. I have been to jail multiple times, had my face broken in 5 places. I was really hopeless and I didn't know how I was going to get out. Finally, a federal investigation led to my trafficker's arrest, and I went home to a family that was really supportive. But we know in this fight against trafficking that that's not the case for everybody. So not only am I really grateful, but I'm also really determined to help communities learn how to be that family for survivors that are trying to rebuild their lives.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine.
Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore CNN.com/impact. Click to take action.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
Inflation has proved a frustrating challenge in the United States. The president is trying a number of things to bring down skyrocketing prices. Economists, however, say there's no short answer to why inflation feels so out of control. But the White House says the Russian president has a lot to do with it. As CNN's Tom Foreman explains.
In the air, on the ground, in businesses and homes, rising prices are scorching American pocketbooks. Yet who does the White House blame? The leader of faraway Russia, Vladimir Putin.
We've never seen anything like Putin's tax on both food and gas. I'm doing everything in my power to blunt Putin's gas price hike.
Certainly when Russia invaded Ukraine, global energy prices soared as much of the world turned away from Russian fuel exports. Agricultural export problems in Russia and production disruptions in Ukraine have the World Food Program tweeting about ripple effects everywhere.
These two countries supply about 30% of all the wheat exports globally.
So, money watchers like Julia Horowitz say,
I think Joe Biden has a point, and the war in Ukraine is absolutely exacerbating rising food costs and rising fuel costs that are putting pressure on American households all across the country.
But hold on. America's inflationary surge started in May of 2020 while Trump was still in office and has skyrocketed under Biden. The war effect kicked in only a few months ago. Economists say that bigger trend was driven by the pandemic, which is still disrupting production in places like China and supply chains all over. But they also cite supply's evil twin, demand for goods and services, which is way up, pushed by Americans eager to spend pandemic savings, and that has President Biden himself taking heat.
There's a lot of debate right now among economists about whether the stimulus packages that were passed by the Biden administration fueled demand, and that supercharged the inflation problem.
Still, many financial analysts say while Putin does not deserve all the blame, his war in Ukraine has undeniably made inflationary woes worse, even as the White House keeps promising to somehow make it all better.
Jobs are back, but prices are still too high. COVID is down, but gas prices are up. Our work isn't done.
The White House would not be wrong to say the real causes of inflation are a global economy, the lingering pandemic, the fighting in Ukraine, maybe some corporate greed, and Americans going on a spending spree after being cooped up for 2 years. But that's complicated. It's much easier politically to say, see that bad guy in the Kremlin? It's his fault. Tom Foreman, CNN, Washington.
And there's worrying economic news from the UK, where average wages are falling at the fastest rate in more than 2 decades. The country is also facing its highest inflation since the early 1980s. CNN's Anna Stewart reports people everywhere are feeling the impact, even when it comes to something synonymous with the British Isles.
People flock to the seaside town of Whitstable for this. A peaceful day out on these pebbly shores. It feels far removed from the war in Ukraine, but its impact is still reaching the UK's shores and Britain's unofficial national dish.
This is delicious. You actually just can't beat eating chips right by the seaside. Now, this traditionally was considered quite a cheap meal, but everything you see here is shooting up in price. From the white fish and the batter used to cook it, the potatoes and the cooking oil, the mushy peas, even the packaging.
Since last year, vegetable oil is nearly 50% more expensive globally. Wheat prices are up even more, and the price of fertilizers made in the UK are up nearly 180%, which pushes up the cost of vegetables like potatoes. All key ingredients for fish and chips, and all that largely a result of the war in Ukraine, one of the world's biggest producers of food commodities. Thank you very much. BC Jones is a family-run business. So how long has this been in your family?
Oh, 60 years.
60 years? The last 2 years have seen it battered by these rising costs.
You see the horror going on in Ukraine. Brexit had an impact. Prices of fish, everything's gone through the roof.
So much of the white fish that you get in fish and chip shops is actually caught in Russian waters, and that's got more expensive as a result of tariffs.
Seeing the price of cod increase week on week to 60% so far, it's directly linked to the sanctions.
Your profit margins must be really squeezed.
The profit margins are literally evaporating.
Down at the harbour, local fishermen are bringing up shellfish, the main catch for this seaside town.
What affects us is oil, price of fuel. You know, I mean, my diesel bill has doubled. You know, I'm only a little boat at the end of the day, but you know, it's a big cost.
For these fishermen and the UK's chippies, the problem doesn't stop there. Not only have prices gone up, but customers have less money to spend.
Energy bills have gone up, petrol's gone up as well. Yeah, I definitely will be more conscious, I think, when I go out.
Definitely think twice before we decide to go out.
To be truthful, I'm looking for the cheapest place to have the food because I used to go in the restaurant, but when you go there now, it's horrible. The price is nearly double.
It's 26.
For now, fish and chips still appears to be in hot demand here. But as the cost of living continues to bite, tucking into this traditional seaside dish may become less palatable. Anna Stewart, CNN, Whitstable, UK.
All right, still to come here on One World, Ukraine warns it is severely outgunned by Russia. You're looking at live pictures there of NATO headquarters. We've just learned the United States is providing another $1 billion in security assistance. Again, live pictures there in Brussels, where we are waiting to hear from the US Defense Secretary at NATO headquarters. We'll have details after the break.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
We've missed the globetrotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering the city's DNA,